Alrighty, hello folks. Just gonna chat for a couple minutes as people show up. I know that it is a bit later than usual for folks who are in the Americas, but I'm hoping that we're gonna get some folks from maybe across the pond, either direction. Maybe some Australians, maybe some folks in Asia. We'll see what happens. The goal here, as I mentioned in the Discord, is to just try and make this live chat a little bit more available to folks uh, around the world rather than just in a couple dedicated time zones, which is the middle of my day. Um, we're going to run this experiment for a little while, see how it works. The goal is not necessarily to get more people showing up at this time slot. I'm not looking for viewership numbers, that's not what I'm chasing here. I just hope that folks are able to join us who haven't been able to join us before. The link for the judge exam, I can toss that in there in just a second. Uh, you can find the exam on that link that I theoretically just sent out. There we go. Taking just a second to catch up with Twitch. Um, this is still the Judge Apprentice exam that's been out for a couple of weeks at this point. I hope your daughter's feeling better now. Please don't feel any rush to take this exam. Uh, my recommendations to folks who are taking the exam is take it when you can find some time to dedicate to it. Take it on a desktop or laptop computer rather than on your phone. It's easier to look up documents and look up cards on it. Plus, card images are displayed a little bit better. It's not optimized for mobile, but yeah, I'm glad y'all could join me. Yes, as Terramar says, there is no second chance at this time, so wait until you can focus on it. The number of people who've been like, I'm really excited and went out and did it and missed by one question and I should have read it a little bit more carefully, or if I had pulled up the card or if I hadn't been doing it on my phone, I would have passed. And I don't like hearing those stories. I don't want to be testing. The test should be testing your knowledge, not how much you're able to focus. Um, I am slowly working on developing an updated version of the test so that folks who failed the first time around can go ahead and take it a second time. But ideally, that by the time we get that second test available, testing is built into Nexus, so you don't have to go to a Google form and then I have to manually update your profile and then manually update your Discord. If we can bring it down to less manual operations, that would be great. As we get started, if anybody has any questions about anything, please feel free to ask. This past weekend, I was down in Tampa Bay in Florida for SCG Con Tampa Bay. I was one of the floor judges on the 1Ks and 2Ks that they had down there. I think we had about 30 players both Friday and Sunday for the 1Ks, and about 50 players or so for the 2K on Saturday. It was a great experience. All the folks down there were a delight. We ran into some lovely logistical issues that I'm glad that we got to solve, and they shouldn't be issues for anybody else moving forward. It's part of the transition to Melee. Any events created before, um, any events created for Star Wars Unlimited in Melee before Thursday had some nonsense going on with their tiebreakers. That should be all sorted when you create your events in Melee. That shouldn't be a problem for you. Bushwookie Gaming asking if I'm planning on coming to Portland for SCG Con in February. Yes, I'm planning on it, or rather, I'm planning on applying. That doesn't mean I'll necessarily get accepted. I'll probably be applying for both the Magic and Star Wars sides. I love Portland. Any chance I get, any excuse I have to go to Powell's in Portland, I will go there. For those of you who aren't aware of Powell's, Powell's is, I believe, the world's largest independent bookstore. It is a city block. It is filled with books, and I can just get lost in there. I actually can't because I've like memorized the map because I've been there so many times, but there's a little bit of a maze. Um, In any case, let's dive into these lessons. We've got a double header tonight because I was traveling. So give me a second to test out some technology here. Alrighty, sorry about that. Right, let's get into the lesson. I'm going to need to pull up Twitch at some point for moderation tools. But let's get into the lesson. Hey, look, it's the lesson. So, the game concepts is a rather large section. There are 17 subsections, and we're going to just go through all of them. This first lesson is 1 through 8. The second is 1 through 17. A lot of this was covered in, what was it? Lesson 3 for the Judge Apprentice? Yeah, Lesson 3 for the Judge Apprentice. So, some of this you may already know, but that's okay. Repeating information just means that you'll have a little bit more knowledge and a little bit firmer of a foundation. So, diving right in. I also have some hot chocolate because it's late here and I want something nice and warm to drink. So, I might take a drink of that every once in a while. But I'm just going to ramble for the next hour or so. The rules. The rules apply to games of Star Wars Unlimited. They don't, in fact, apply to Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, Lorcana, Flesh and Blood, or anything else. Just Star Wars Unlimited. You can also play games of Star Wars Unlimited ignoring the rules, but then you have this question of what really is Star Wars Unlimited and what makes a game, and that's a silly question that some people have debated. This is huge deviation, but we're going to accept it. Terramar asks, did I bring enough for everyone? And technically, I have enough hot chocolate packets up in the kitchen to make sure that everybody in chat has hot chocolate if they were here and wanted some. So yes, I did. You just didn't show up at my house. And also, please don't show up at my house at midnight. I have to go to bed soon, and I cannot host any of you. I don't have space for that. But going back to section 1.1, something that's very important to keep in mind is that the language used throughout the rules up until section 11 or 12, section 11 and 12, except for those last two sections, all of it is intended for interpretation in two-player games. So there's a lot of your opponent rather than an opponent. Or talking about the other player. And it gets a little bit different, and some things can apply weirdly, if you're trying to interpret these two-player rules for 4 players. Now, of course, to play the game, players must have a deck, initiative counter, tokens, and a way to track damage on units. Some other things are nice to have, counters to keep track of epic actions, reminder counters, that sort of thing. Those are nice to have, but are not required. Yes, Jonah's having a hot chocolate party. It's going to be in Portland. Yeah, other side of the country. That's what's happening. Alrighty, let's talk about the deck. So, Section 1.1 requires a player has a deck. Section 1.2 helpfully defines what a deck is. There is no maximum deck size. In Premier, you could theoretically bring your entire collection, pull out all the leaders and bases and shuffle it up and say, this is my deck. That's probably not the best idea, but if you really want to confuse some people, you could do that. In Limited, the deck size is capped by the number of cards you open. You could open your 6 booster packs in Sealed, pull out the leaders and bases, shuffle them all together, and call that your deck. You probably wouldn't lose to milling or running out of cards in your deck, but I don't think you would win either. I think you would lose some other way. Minimum deck size, however, is a thing. The minimum deck size is dependent on format. In Premier, which is the primary constructed format, you're limited to a minimum of 50 cards and cannot have more than 3 copies of any one card. In limited formats, which is, it's very weird to talk about limited unlimited, but hey, here we are. In limited unlimited, you must have at least 30 cards in your deck, and are not limited in number of copies of cards except by what you opened. So, if you somehow opened, I don't know, I think the theoretical maximum is 18 Darksabers. Like, one in the Mythic Rare slot, one in the Wild Card Hyper slot, and one in the Foil slot, and not Mythic Rare, Rare/Legendary slot. I think you could theoretically get 3 of a card in a pack. That's super unlikely, and it's super unlikely to be a Legendary, but you can open very easily 4 or 5 commons in a sealed pool. Or in draft, you can very easily pick up more than 4 or 5 of a particular common. And so you don't have that 3 of limit that you see in Premier. In Twin Suns, you have to have at least 50 cards. That minimum is going to increase to 80 with set 4, Jump to Lightspeed, which is coming out in January. And you're limited to 1 copy of any card. Notably, you're also limited to 1 leader and 1 base in Premier and Limited. In Twin Suns, it is 2 leaders and 1 base. I'm curious to see if it specifies 2 different leaders, or if you could just be like, yeah, I want to have Boba twice, because I feel like some people would do that. I'm going to just flip through my rules right now to see if that shows up in Twin Suns. Oh yeah, exactly 2 different leaders. That's a shame. Otherwise, double Boba everywhere. Alrighty. Tokens do not count towards any of these limitations, because tokens, while they are a card type and to some degree count as cards, are not part of your deck. And decks can include cards of any aspect, even if they're not part of your leader and base colors. The golden rules. We've talked about these golden rules before, but they're very important, so we're going to keep on talking about them. The first of the golden rules is precedence. It talks about which rules you should follow in case 2 sets of rules disagree or have a conflict. If the comprehensive rules contradict the quick start rules, we follow the comprehensive rules. If the ability text of a card contradicts the comprehensive rules, we do what the cards say. Reminder text, which is in italics and in parentheses, is below card text, comprehensive rules, and quick start rules. It is not mechanics. It is just a reminder of what should generally be happening. Reminder text is not necessarily complete. The reminder text on Sentinel is one that I have ingrained in my brain as incomplete in particular. So when reading a card, don't super trust the reminder text. It's a useful reminder, but it should not be taken as rules. So the precedence is cards first, then comprehensive rules, then quick start rules, then reminder text. The reason cards need to come first is because if cards did not come first, Hera Syndulla and Chirrut Imwe wouldn't function, because the comprehensive rules say that you don't get to do those things. You don't get to... Units are defeated by having no remaining HP. And if the CR overruled the cards, Chirrut would do nothing. Similarly, the comprehensive rules take precedence over the quick start rules, because the quick start rules say that all bases start with 30 HP. Energy Conversion Lab, among others, starts at not 30. We've seen cards coming out of Twilight of the Republic with 24 and 26 starting HP. So that means that the CR is more important, or more accurate, I should say, than the quick start rules, which makes sense. The quick start rules are only a couple of pages, and the comprehensive rules are close to 50. And then reminder text is just reminder text. It's not actually game rules, and so it is below all of the above. Holy moly, J-Freak. One of your pre-release boxes had 15 pairs and 2 triples. Your 6 rares were 3 pairs. That's definitely not the variety you want to see the first time you're opening packs, but yeah, I can imagine that you had a lot of consistency that other people did not have. But back to the golden rules. Do as much as you can. Sometimes when resolving an ability, you're not going to be able to do everything that ability has printed on it. And you'll follow this golden rule in which you do as much as you can. If you play the forces with me on an exhausted unit, you can give it 2 experience tokens, so you can do that. If it's a force unit, you can give it a shield token, so you do that. If it's exhausted, you can't attack with it, and so you don't do that. And then the event completes its resolution. You can even play the forces with me without any friendly units. You simply would do nothing. It's probably not the best play to play an event that costs 4 resources and does nothing, but you're allowed to do that. Your opponent might have a Devastator, and you might want to, I think it's Devastator, the Green Star Destroyer that wipes the abilities from the first event your opponent plays each round. You might want to just play the forces with me, do nothing with it. Relentless, thank you. You might just want to play the forces with me, even though you don't have any units you can choose with it, just to get that out of the way so you can use a removal spell on Relentless. Golden rule number 3. Restrictions override permissions. When you have a restrictive ability that conflicts with a permissive ability or an ability that tells you to take an action, the ability that restricts you takes precedence. The example that I use here is Regional Governor. If you have a card named, you're not able to play that card, even if some other card is instructing you to do so, whether it be Darth Vader, Cobb Vanth, or one of a million other things. Similarly, if you put Entrenched onto a unit, gives it +3/+3 and can't attack bases, and played an event that said attack with a unit or attack a base with a unit, even though that event is instructing you to attack a base, the Entrench restriction will keep you from making that attack. You do as much as you can, so if you are giving the unit a buff, applying experience or shields as part of that event or ability, you would do that, but then you would not complete that attack. As I move on, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll get to them as I can. Please feel free to ask or give examples. They can be on-topic questions or off-topic questions. I don't know if y'all have noticed, but I go off-topic at as soon as anybody says anything. I'll take any excuse to go off-topic. Alrighty. Section 1.4. Players and the active player. Unsurprisingly, a player is anybody playing the game, and their opponent is anyone else in that game. This means that even if you have an informal alliance in a multiplayer game, or if you have a formal alliance signed in ink or with cookies, that person is still an opponent. So if a card says an opponent makes a choice, or you, like an opponent, draws a card, you can choose that person. Even though they're an ally, they're not a game sense ally, and the game doesn't care about your legal agreements. The active player, as mentioned, is the person taking an action. So if you are taking your turn, you are the active player, and all of your opponents are not the active player. If you have the initiative, and no players taking an action, so that's at the beginning and end of the action phase, as well as the entirety of the regroup phase, you are the active player. This is important to know for resolving triggers. The way triggers resolve is the active player chooses, in the case of simultaneous triggers, which player resolves their abilities first. And so if there are multiple triggers in, say, the regroup phase, then you, as the active player, choose which ones happen first, which can be a very useful thing. Section 1.5. Cards. There are 6 card types: bases, events, leaders, units, upgrades, tokens. Resources are not a card type, even though they are in some ways treated similarly to card types in that there are rules about how they work. No card is a resource. I'm going to be I just finished writing up the lesson for this week's lesson, which covers card types in depth. But we're just going to touch on them very briefly here. Card ownership. The owner of the card is the player who started the game with it in their deck. It applies to the base and the leader that they started with, even though those did not start in the deck. And it applies to any tokens that a player creates, even though those also did not start in the deck. Some cards are going to talk about control. A player controls all cards that they put into play, including resources and tokens. So if I have an effect that has you create a token, for example, Lom Pike, which says on attack, you may put a shield token on a unit on a friendly unit. If you do so, an enemy may put a shield token on a unit they control, or sorry, you choose the unit that they put it on. They are still putting that token into play, and they control that shield token for various purposes. Now, when a card changes control, it maintains status. So if you gain control of a unit, it's going to remain ready if it was ready and exhausted if it was exhausted. This means that control change effects are better towards the start of the round, so you can gain control of cards and then attack with them, rather than later in the round when they're more likely to be exhausted. You can play upgrades onto enemy units, and you continue to control the upgrade, but if the unit gains abilities, the controller of the unit controls those abilities. The example that we use here is with Jedi Lightsaber. If you give your opponent's unit a Jedi Lightsaber, that player controls the on-attack trigger. If the trigger involves a choice, they will be the one making the choice, even though it is your card that is giving the unit the ability. Thank you for that Oracle text, or the card text, JFreak. Lom Pike, you may give a shield token to an enemy unit. So you give the enemy unit a shield token, that player is going to put it into play, they control it. Similarly, or this may be reworded slightly to account for putting token units into play in Twilight of the Republic, because the language isn't precise for those right now, but we're sure to see an update by the time Twilight of the Republic comes out. Friendly and enemy refers to control, essentially. Cards a player controls are friendly to them. Cards controlled by an opponent are enemy to them. With Bright Hope, if you have used Traitorous to take control of a battlefield Marine, you can return it to its owner's hand because it is a friendly unit to you. However, it does not return to your hand because you do not own the battlefield Marine. It goes to your opponent because they are the owner of it. As we talked about a little bit before on control, cards also have status. This status is generally ready, exhausted, face up, or face down. Most frequently for face up, face down, that's going to be leaders. Either leader units are face up, or leaders are face up when in the base zone, and face down when deployed as leader units. Cards that are captured are also face down, as are resources. JFreak says, interesting, this sort of resolves the Lom Pike Boba armor issue in the Discord. This works with any token given to a unit. That is my understanding of the rules. While you are the owner of the shield token, because you control or own the effect that created it, you're not the one who actually puts it into play. I really want to see how the rules are updated for Twilight of the Republic. Effects like Jesse, who... Let me pull up Jesse real quick. We're going to be talking about some spoilers real quick, so if you don't want to hear those, plug your ears for like the next 30 seconds. Jesse says, when played, an opponent creates 2 Battle Droid tokens. Those tokens they're going to control because they created them. Looking at the wording on Lom Pike, it has you giving the shield token to an enemy unit, so you might still control it. I'm interested to see what they do with the language. I'm not sure if how it will play out. Bushwookie Gaming says, if I own the token, then can I sacrifice the token to an effect since I own it? So that's a little weird to answer because Star Wars Unlimited doesn't have sacrifice like Magic does. It has defeat. Oh gosh, there's a red upgrade that I can't remember the name of that I'm going to look up now. Our good friend Heroic Resolve. Exploit. Exploit would work for... So this is me diving into what I say you should never do, which is answering questions about cards and mechanics that we don't have the rules for yet. Let me pull up something with Exploit real quick and see what it says. So Exploit says, while playing this card, defeat up to N units you control. And so if you created... You need to control the units. If your opponent gave you tokens, you would control those tokens. Token units, to be clear. If you give your opponent token units, they control those token units. At least this is my perception. If you are able to defeat cards you don't own or control. For example, Heroic Resolve is an upgrade from... is that Shadows? Yeah, that's Shadows. It says attached unit gains action, pay 2 resources, and defeat a Heroic Resolve on this unit. Attack with this unit. It gets +4/+0 and gains Overwhelm for this attack. The player who controls the unit that Heroic Resolve is attached to is able to activate that ability and defeat the Heroic Resolve, even if they don't own or control the Heroic Resolve. You're able to defeat cards you don't own. There's no such thing as sacrifice, which is a term that I think is used in Flesh and Blood and Magic that requires you to control the card. So Ed 4122 asks, we can exhaust an exhausted unit to resolve an ability. That is it depends on the wording of the ability. If it says, if you do, then the ability will not resolve because you did not exhaust the card. It was already exhausted. If it just says, exhaust a unit, then draw a card, you can not exhaust a unit or choose a unit that is already exhausted and then draw a card. If you only have ready units, then you would have to exhaust one of them. Bushwookie Gaming says, can't remember the card, but a card says defeat an upgrade on a unit to give a shield token to a unit. Can I defeat a shield I own on an opposing unit? I think that's Rose Tico. She says, on attack, you may defeat a shield token on a friendly unit. If you do, give 2 experience tokens to that unit. That's similar. That one you can... So it doesn't have to be a shield token you control. It just needs to be a shield token on a friendly unit. Let me pull up Finn, because folks in chat are asking about Finn. Defeat a friendly upgrade on a unit. If you do, give a shield token to that unit. So in that case, you have to control the upgrade. It cannot be an upgrade you don't control, which is... So with Rose, it needs to be specifically a shield token on a friendly unit, but you do not need to control the token. You just need to control the unit. With Finn, it says defeat a friendly upgrade on a unit. So it can be an entrench that you played on your opponent's unit if you wanted to give them a shield token. So both of them specify where the friendliness needs to be. With Finn, it needs to be a friendly upgrade. With Rose, it needs to be on a friendly unit. Does that make sense to y'all? So I've said a lot of friendly and enemy and upgrade and unit in the last 30 seconds, and I know what I'm talking about, but may have been a little bit confusing to all y'all, because I did not prepare that, and that's certainly not scripted. I'm not seeing any, no, that made no sense at all, so we're going to move on. Going back to ready and exhausted and status, we talked about face up, face down, and then we have ready and exhausted. Ready is when a card is upright, although on leaders it's a little bit weird because they don't have the same orientation, but the text is upright. Card is exhausted when it's turned sideways. Non-leader units and resources enter play exhausted unless otherwise specified. Upgrades are neither exhausted nor ready. That is not a status condition that can affect them, at least for now. Exhausted cards ready when instructed to do so, say from an effect like Keep Fighting, or during the regroup phase during the ready step. Units must be ready in order to attack or to pay costs that include exhausting. However, as mentioned, you can ready a ready unit and exhaust an exhausted unit. It simply will not count for if you do, but that is an instruction that you can follow. Exhausted units can be attacked. Exhausting doesn't protect you from attacks. I don't think that's something that's in the rules, but it's something that I include because I know that sometimes that's a question that new players have. Alrighty, defeating cards. Cards are defeated in a variety of ways. Pretty much anything that's in play can be defeated. Units and bases are defeated when damage is greater than or equal to their HP. Units, upgrades, and resources are defeated when an ability defeats them directly. Even though resources aren't a card type, they can still be defeated. Upgrades are defeated when the unit they are attached to is defeated. Tokens are defeated in the same way as a non-token is, but are set aside outside of the game rather than going to any other zone. And defeated cards other than leaders go to their owner's discard pile. It's relatively straightforward with few strange things. But yeah, if a token tries to go anywhere other than in play, it leaves the game entirely. Finally, we get to aspects. There are 6 aspects: Vigilance, Command, Cunning, Aggression, Heroism, and Villainy. Leaders and bases have aspects in the upper right corner and provide those aspects to the deck. All other card types have them in the upper left corner, if they have them at all. If they don't, they're neutral, which is perfectly fine. But you have an aspect penalty that you need to pay for each aspect a card has that is not provided to your deck by your leader and base. That is, I think, one of the more fundamental rules, and at this point, with your level of involvement, I think y'all know that, and how that works. So we're just going to keep on trucking through, because we have so many more sections to get through tonight. 1.6. Some cards have abilities. Abilities are how cards function. Each ability is on a new line. Our friend Gore from Twilight of the Republic has just 4 bold lines: Exploit, Sentinel, Ambush, Overwhelm, and I just love how that looks on a card. It's possible at some point when they have text creep and some cards get more complicated, they might separate some abilities by commas rather than line breaks, but for now, each ability is on a new line. When you're resolving an ability, you follow that golden rule number 2, which is do as much as you can. However, abilities that say you may can be skipped. If you play Imperial Interceptor and there are no other space units in play, you do not have to have the Interceptor shoot on itself. That would be a waste of a perfectly good TIE Interceptor. Alrighty. Resources. We've talked about resources and how they're not a card type, but they are very important to the game. They are how you pay for, well, everything, really. Any card placed into the resource zone is a resource. They're considered blank and with no attributes, and they do not trigger abilities. Playing a unit playing a command unit as a resource, or putting a command unit into play as a resource, will not trigger Colonel Yularen. However, cards with Smuggle can be played. They do retain that ability because it specifies in the rules that can be used from resource. Players may look at and reorder their resources at any time. This means that if, say, your opponent is using DJ or Scanning Officer, after they play the card and indicate the trigger, you as a player can rearrange your resources so that you can kind of play a shell game and hide which ones are which. If, for example, I believe it's Enterprising Lackeys is a card that when defeated, there's a way that you can return it to play as a resource, and your opponent might track that with DJing. They might want to steal it so that they can play it themselves. You are allowed to randomize your resources as long as you maintain which resources were exhausted and which resources were ready. No shenanigans in that space. Cost is in the upper left corner of a card. It's that big old bold number and that yellow hexagon. Modifications to the cost of a card are cumulative. If a card is played for free, all modifiers are ignored. That includes increases like Del Mico, cost reductions like Bib Fortuna, as well as any aspect penalty. Additional costs, however, like Saw Gerrera and no other card at this time, I believe, must be paid even if the card is being played for free. That's almost certainly I'm gonna absolutely 100% include a Saw Gerrera play for free question somewhere in the L1 test, just because it's something that we're gonna need to check you on, because I'm positive going to be a bigger mechanic over time, just because additional costs are such a useful tool for designers. So write that one down in your notebooks. J-Freak says, ownership is also public. You need to keep readied and exhausted an opponent. Yes, opponent resources do need to be kept separate as well. So yeah, a Stolen Super Laser, Tech, DJ, Enterprising Lackeys, anything that goes into your resource zone, that ownership is kept track of. So you can randomize, but there are some exceptions to that randomization. And frankly, playing a shell game is a little silly. I don't know how much of an edge that's going to get you, and it's just going to slow down your match. When paying costs, all parts of an action ability cost must be paid. For example, with Fennec Shand, if you have just 5 resources, you can activate Fennec Shand, but you can't play the TIE Advanced because you don't have enough resources to pay its cost, because its cost is modified by the aspect penalty, and Fennec Shand doesn't let you get around that. And I think that's it for this lesson. We go to the black screen. Fantastic. We're going to transition back to me real quick as we transition to the next lesson. This is also a great time for y'all to ask any questions you may have about what we just covered there. Other than that, we're just going to dive right into more game concepts. Let me just pull this up, go to the slideshow, make sure it's showing up on the right monitor, and present from the beginning. Wonderful. Cutting back to our lovely presentation. Game Concepts Part 2, Level 1, Lesson 3. We're going to talk about sections 1.9 to 1.17. This one's a little bit shorter than the previous lesson, as we don't have nearly as many things to talk about. It's a couple more sections, but cards is quite the beefy section in game concepts. It's like a page and a half all on its own. So let's just dive right in. Damage. Any card with HP can be dealt damage. This is going to be bases, units, and unit leaders. Damage is represented by counters. A card is damaged if it has at least one damage counter on it. If one ability deals damage to multiple objects, that damage is simultaneous. So Bombing Run will damage all of the units that are in play in a particular arena simultaneously. This means that, for example, when defeated triggers are all going to happen at the same time. If one ability deals damage multiple times to one object, it's sequential. That means looking at maximum firepower. If you have two units that have when they deal damage triggers, if the first unit dealing damage defeats the unit that you've chosen with maximum firepower, the second unit will not deal damage because there's nothing for it to deal damage to, and so its ability won't trigger. There are also a couple technical terms with regards to damage. Combat damage is only as part of an attack. Damage from abilities is never combat damage. Whether it's damage like from maximum firepower, which says a unit deals damage, that's not combat damage. A damage from Greedo dying in combat, even though that is damage happening during the combat damage step, that is also not combat damage. Just damage from the attack itself. Excess damage is any damage greater than the amount needed to defeat a unit. This is not Magic the Gathering. You don't assign damage equal to a creature or unit's HP. You deal all of your damage to a unit until it is defeated, and then damage is excess. So if you had a 500 power unit that with Overwhelm, and you attack Chirrut, Chirrut takes 500 damage. You assign no damage to the enemy base because there's no amount of damage that can defeat Chirrut. Similarly, if a unit has shield, there's no amount of damage that would result in excess damage because that shield is going to prevent all of it. With Boba armor, it prevents 2 damage, and so you're going to always include dealing that 2 damage to the upgraded Boba before you calculate any excess damage or overwhelm. Power. All units have power, even if it's 0. The value on a unit is its printed power on the card itself. Abilities check for printed power when out of play, and check for modified power if the card is in play. So that is to say, oh gosh, my brain just disappeared. Yes, Grand Inquisitor looks for modified power, whereas cards that are, say, looking in your discard pile or looking in your deck, that's looking for printed power. To determine a unit's power, its current modified power, you take the printed power, apply any increases, and then apply any decreases. It can't be less than 0. However, this value is constantly reevaluated. So let's say you have a unit with 2 printed power. You give it +1 +0, so now it's up to 3 printed power, and give it -4 -0. It has currently 0 power. If you were to then give it +2 power, you're not adding it on in time sequence. It is, you have a unit with 2 base power, you're adding a total of 3 from different sources, and then reducing by 2. And so you get eventually to a place, or reducing by 4, sorry. So you do eventually get to 1 point of positive power. I know that's a clumsy example. Again, I don't have this script in front of me. But it is not, power is not calculated in a linear time fashion. It's calculated by taking the base, then applying all increases, and then applying all decreases. This is similar to how cost modifications are calculated. HP is somewhat similar in terms of calculation. All units and bases have HP. Most abilities don't refer to printed HP or total HP. They generally refer to remaining HP. Remaining HP is printed HP plus increases minus decreases minus the number of damage counters. Units are defeated if their remaining HP is less than or equal to 0, except for Chirrut, because Chirrut is Chirrut. Some cards may refer to HP, and it would be similar to how power is referred to. If a card just says a unit with HP, if it is in play, we're going to look at modified total HP. If it's out of play, we'll look at total, or we'll look at the printed HP if a card just says HP as opposed to remaining HP. Section 12, counters. We got some nice game-genic counters displayed here. There are a variety of counters used for a variety of things. You have the initiative counter, which indicates which player has initiative and whether it's been taken this round. If you're not flipping your initiative counter over each time it's being claimed, you're technically breaking the rules, but also most players are able to keep track of who has the initiative because one player is doing nothing while the other player is taking a bunch of actions, or the round ends pretty much as soon as one player claims the initiative, and so it doesn't get too confusing. You also have epic action counters, generally used for leaders and bases. Damage counters does what it says on the tin, it marks damage. And you can have other markers. You can have token upgrades, temporary buffs, lasting and delayed effects. All sorts of things can be marked with counters, but those are not necessarily required by the rules themselves. You can also use things other than very nice acrylic counters, as long as it's clear to both you and your opponent. If you want to put red Skittles on your cards as damage and blue Skittles as shields, go right ahead as long as your opponent understands. So it asks, any object can be used as the initiative? Essentially, yeah, as long as it's clear to both you and your opponent that it is the initiative counter. I have used deck boxes as an initiative counter. I've used fidget toys. I've used all sorts of things that's the initiative counter. I guess the only other requirement is that it's like reasonable for you to pass back and forth. So you can't just be like, yes, my car is my initiative counter. We're just going to drive it from one side of the table to the other. It does need to be manipulable, but it doesn't have to be a specific initiative counter. This past weekend in Tampa, people were using all sorts of cool things. Rebel and Imperial metal coins. I've seen some people using 3D printed like credits as initiative counters. Little bars of Beskar. Whatever is you want to use and is clear to you and your opponent is 100% good. Our next two sections, we're just going to combine them because drawing and discarding cards are directly related. Drawn cards go directly to the hand, and you can draw from a deck. Drawing from an empty deck causes the player drawing the card to take 3 damage per card that they're drawing. When you discard a card, it goes directly from the zone you're discarding it from, which is going to be either your deck or your hand. By default, a player discarding cards chooses which card to discard. Some abilities make the selection random, as in with Cunning, and some abilities specify which player makes the choice. Spark of Rebellion instructs the player resolving the ability to make that choice rather than the opponent discarding. If Spark of Rebellion said, look at an opponent's hand, and that player discards a card from it, it would, 1, be a lot worse, and 2, it would be that player making the choice of what card to discard. So at 4122 asks, can I place reminder tokens on opponent's units, like to remember an ability or a bounty? You can, absolutely. Before you touch your opponent's cards, I would just say ask them if you can touch their cards, just out of general respect. But 9 times out of 10, probably closer to 99 times out of 100, if you say, hey, do you mind if I put a counter on that to remind myself of the bounty, or the +2/+2 from Overwhelming Barrage, whatever it may be, they'll say yes, or they'll be like, oh yeah, I got a token or a counter right over here. Making sure that the game state is clear to both players is very useful, and adding more information is generally going to be helpful. So at 4122, reading ahead on the syllabus, asks, can discard a 0 size hand? So if you don't have any cards in your hand, you cannot discard a card. So if an ability said, discard a card. If you do, this unit gets put 2 experience counters on this unit. You can't do that if you don't have any cards in your hand. However, the instruction, discard your hand, essentially means discard each card in your hand until you have no cards in your hand. So that means that if you have no cards in your hand, you can discard your entire hand of 0 cards and meet the if you do requirement. So if you play black 1 and it's the last card you had in your hand, you can discard 0 cards, because that is the entirety of your hand, and draw 3 cards. That's one of the weirder interactions, because you're not actually discarding cards, but you are discarding your hand. Whereas if you had a card that said, if black 1 said, when played when defeated, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. You would not be able to do that with no cards in hand, because you cannot meet the requirement of discarding a card. It's a little weird. Section 1.15. There are 5 actions. Play a card, attack with a unit, use an action ability, take the initiative, and pass. Play a card, attack with a unit, use an action ability. We covered in some detail in the Judge Apprentice Lesson 6, Actions, Abilities, and Effects, and we'll be getting to it down the line in these Level 1 lessons in even more detail than we went into there. However, we're going to talk a little bit about initiative and passing here. When the player takes the initiative, it is 1 player per round. Only 1 person can claim the initiative each round. And a player who takes the initiative automatically passes for the rest of that round. You do still resolve all abilities and effects, and you can still take actions if an ability or effect instructs you to do so. If you took this lesson earlier, this was erroneously an example including Cobb Vanth. That example was incorrect, which was pointed out by a lovely member of the Discord. If you see other errors in the lessons, please feel free to drop into the discussion channel for that lesson and let me know what that error is. Otherwise, let's say you've claimed the initiative, and so you're passing for the rest of your turns in this round, and then your opponent attacks with a Stolen Landspeeder. The Stolen Landspeeder is defeated. The bounty will trigger, and if you own this unit, which you do in this example, you can play it from your discard pile for free and give an experience token to it. With that effect, with that ability triggering, you are able to take the play a card action, even though you have also taken the initiative and are therefore passing for all of your turns, because this is not your turn, this is you resolving an ability. Finally, the last action is passing. You can pass even with other actions available to take. You don't have to do everything all the time. And if your opponent doesn't pass, you can take actions on future turns. If your opponent also passes, then we're, unfortunately for you, going into the regroup phase along with the drawing cards, readying, and all that good stuff. Alrighty, we're about to get into the end game here, and we're going to talk about game state in just a second. Game state covers a lot. The game state is the status and quality of every object in the game. J-Freak. Cobb Vanth is a good example of one that doesn't let you take advantage of its ability. I'm going to just pull up Cobb Vanth so I can read it off to y'all. Cobb Vanth says, when defeated, search the top 10 cards of your deck for a unit that costs 2 or less and discard it. For this phase, you may play that card from your discard pile for free. So you are allowed to search the top 10 cards of your deck. You can find a card that costs 2 or less, and you can discard it. However, for this phase, you may play that card from your discard pile for free isn't something that you can take advantage of, because you're not able to take the play a card action anymore because you've claimed the initiative. Now, back in game state, it's everything. It's each card's current zone, its controller, all of its attributes, its status, which includes ready and exhausted, face up or face down, who controls the initiative counter and whether it is taken or available, the status of open and hidden information for a player, status of all lasting and delayed effects, status of epic actions, the status of all triggers and nested actions that are waiting to resolve. Pretty much everything about the game is part of the game state. It's certainly a heck of a list. Now, as an action, you must change the game state in some way. You're not able to activate Fennec Shan's action ability if you do not play a unit with her, because you've not changed the game state in a meaningful way. You can, if, for example, this ability was an epic action, you could only use it once per game, you would be able to use it, because adding an epic action to a card, or an epic action counter to a card, and using that epic action does change the game state. If you wanted to pass effectively without actually using the pass action, so you don't automatically move to the next step or phase, you could use an Energy Conversion Lab's epic action ability and then choose not to play a card to do nothing for a relatively low cost, and force your opponent to make another play, claim the initiative, or pass. However, you can activate Iden Versio's action ability even if no enemy units have been defeated this phase, because Iden becoming exhausted is a change in the game state. Even though the ability resolving will do nothing, activating the ability did change the game state. Finally, we get to open and hidden information. All players are entitled to open information. This is the attributes of face-up cards in play, attributes of face-down captured cards as well, the number of counters or tokens on cards, the number of all cards in all zones, attributes of cards in each player's discard, both sides of each player's leader, owners of cards, that sort of thing. All information that is not open is by default hidden, and players are only allowed to look at hidden information if explicitly allowed to or instructed to by the game rules or a card effect. The contents of a player's hand is always available to that player, as well as their resources. A player's deck is available while searching, but not at other times. Players must disclose open information. You're not allowed to lie or deceive your opponent about, say, the power or HP of a unit, but you can bluff with hidden information. If your opponent says, hey, how many cards do you have in your hand? You have to give them an accurate and honest answer. But you can also say, every card in my hand is a super laser blast. You can straight up lie or bluff with hidden information. You do not need to be accurate in that regard. You can also, with hidden information, not complete instructions. The example here with Grand Moff Tarkin is if you look at the top 5 cards of your deck and see multiple Imperials, you do not need to take any Imperials because that's hidden information and you do not need to reveal that information to your opponent. So Ad 4122 says, can I ask for the number of cards in your opponent's deck? You absolutely can, and they either have to give you a way to count it, so they can just hand the deck to you and say, go ahead and count it, or give you that information directly. If they give you that information directly, they cannot lie about it. So you can absolutely ask, which is very valuable when you are getting close to making them run out of cards in their deck and you have a couple of Vigilance in your hand and you're trying to figure out if you can kill them with those. With that, I believe that is the end of this presentation. We got through all of both lessons in just under an hour, of which I'm very proud. I'm just going to hang out here for the next couple minutes as folks have any other questions. And would be happy to chat. And yeah, Jay Freak, Cobb Vanth is probably a good example of why you wouldn't want to reveal and discard the card here as well. Although I guess with Cobb Vanth, you might be running like Home 1 or Rogue Squadron Speeder or Snow Speeder, and you might want to dig them up later with some other effect in a future turn. But yeah, I'm just here to answer any questions if folks have. I'm going to hang out for a couple more minutes. So it asks, discard zone can be randomized. It absolutely can be, or it can be sorted. This is something that we're going to cover, oh gosh. I'm currently, I think, writing the script for the lesson on zones, but the discard pile is not an ordered zone, so you are allowed to rearrange it. This means, as we were just talking about Rogue Squadron, Snowspeeder, and Home 1, which are both cards that allow you to return units from your discard pile either to your hand or to play, they require the units to be under a certain cost, and so you could put all of those units into a pile next to your discard or put them on top of your discard, just so it's particularly visible to you and it's easier than having to sort through it. So yeah, you can absolutely randomize or sort your discard pile. There is no need to keep your discard pile in a particular order. So can I ask to see the discard zone before an ability is resolved, like Cobb's, and after the ability is resolved? Yep, absolutely. You can see what units they have in there and what was added. The discard pile is open information. All of the attributes in the discard pile are open information. You get to know, if you want to ask what's the highest power unit you have in your discard pile. If you believe that your opponent's going to be playing Palpatine's Return, you can ask them to let you know what force units they have in their discard pile. They might just say, here's my discard pile, you figure it out on your own. The language regarding open information is not perfect. This communication policy around open and hidden information isn't 100% resolved in the rules, and it's probably a better home in tournament policy rather than the comprehensive rules. But you can absolutely ask to see your opponent's discard pile, and you should be allowed to look at it. If opponent says, no, you're not allowed to look at my discard pile, it's a secret, call for a judge, because you're allowed to have access to that information. Oh boy, we got some questions coming in. 3 all at once. Alright, so it says, for some tournaments, opponents' deck lists open information prior to the game. Is that the same in Star Wars Unlimited? In top 8, or after the cut for events with a cut that are being played at competitive tier, deck lists are available. It's not open information, as you are not allowed to have access to it during a match or during a game. You're allowed to have access to it between games. So as you're shuffling up for game 1 and as you're sideboarding for game 2 and 3, you're allowed access to it, but it is not open information. Uncouthism. Does Boba Fett's armor completely ignore pings protecting shields from Cad Bane, or will ping the shield off before armor? I believe this has been answered. Let me see if I can find the answer here. Let me see. So does Boba Fett's armor completely ignore pings protecting shields from Cad Bane, or will ping shields off before the armor? This goes into, I think, a conversation that's being held in the Discord, and it talks about the interaction of replacement and prevention effects, which is one of the latter sections of the rules, which I haven't covered as much as I would like to in theory. It's what? Section 8. I think it's... Is it 8? No. 7.7.5. So if both players have one or more replacement effects triggered by the same condition, and there's multiple effects here, same condition, the controller of the affected object chooses to resolve effects in any order until the condition no longer applies. Even if one player controls both cards, say they control both his shield and Boba's armor, they would choose which effects to resolve. That means that with Boba Fett's armor and a shield, you can always ping the armor first, and then no damage is happening, and so you'd keep the shield. J-Freak says, do you think Lon Pike will get an errata to give a shield token to an enemy unit to maybe choose an enemy unit, they put a shield token on that unit. It's possible. It'd be a functional change, I think. And I don't know if they want to do any functional changes at this point. It's very scary to do functional changes at the birth of the game because it makes people maybe not trust your rules as much or trust the cards. So they may leave it as is and have it just be weird, but not make it so that the card is telling you to do something that it actually does. My Samusil asks, do I have to inform my opponent that I've sideboarded? You do not. You are, something that a lot of players do, and this is allowed, is after game 1, take all 10 cards of your sideboard, shuffle them into your main deck, so you have 60 cards, and then pull 10 cards out. This allows you to disguise how many cards you're sideboarding, or if you're sideboarding at all. You do not need to let them know if you've sideboarded. Soad4122 asks, question from another lesson, but does Star Wars Unlimited website card additional information have the same hierarchy as card text or comprehensive rules? That is a great question. For those of you who don't know, the Star Wars Unlimited card database, if you pull up a card, many of the cards have card rulings. I'm trying to find a card that has some rulings. Just so I can name an example off the top of my head. These rulings aren't available on... I don't believe they're available on external databases. But if you look up, for example, on the official Star Wars Unlimited card database, Brutal Traditions. Brutal Traditions, it has 2 additional rulings. They have dates. Let me just read these real quick. There is no specification on where these rulings take precedence. Reading these rulings are just clarifications that already exist in the rules, at least the ones on Brutal Traditions. So I think they function closer to reminder text than anything else. However, that is not a firm statement. I haven't read all of the additional rulings available on StarWarsUnlimited.com, and so I can't make a hard comment on that. Jfreak asks, right now it gets weird with the Long Pike shield and Boba armor. Does that shield belong to the Long Pike controller or the opponent? It's such a niche spot, but you know how it goes. Right, so I think I may be wrong here. And please correct me if I'm wrong, because I am ready to be wrong. I think it doesn't matter. Because if I control... let's say the shield belongs to the opponent, as does the Boba armor, right? So they're both controlled by opponent. That player gets to choose the order that they go in because they control both the affected unit and both replacement effects. Obviously, they could choose the order. However, if both players have one or more replacement effects triggered by the same condition, the controller of the affected object chooses to resolve effects in any order until the condition no longer applies. So even if they don't control the shield token, they still control the unit that has the shield token and the Boba armor, and so they get to choose the order in which it resolves. At least that's my reading of 7.7.8. So I think it doesn't matter who controls the shield, because the player who controls the unit still gets to make that decision. I think that's a good, I feel like that's a good L2 question. It is a question that's going to come up a lot, but I don't think it's going to be a question that I would expect an L1 to know, say, for weekly play. I'm going to make a note of that. It might not be Lom and Boba's armor. Hopefully by then we have another card that prevents damage other than Boba's armor, so I can use an example other than Boba's armor that everybody's memorized because it's that interaction. But we'll see where that goes. I'm going to just hang out for another couple minutes now that I've answered those questions, see if we got another wave of incoming questions. I just want to shout out to everyone who has joined us today for the first time. I'm glad you were able to join us. Hopefully we'll be able to get some other broadcasts that you're able to show. The next broadcast is going to be offset by 12 hours from this one. We're going to just continue to alternate back and forth. So if this one was early morning for you, the next one will be in the evening. If this one was very late at night for you, the next one will be closer to the middle of the day. With that, though, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.